This week on the Tech on Tap podcast, we bring in the XCP team to talk about what XCP can do and how it works. It slices, it dices, it migrates.
Welcome to the Tech on Tap podcast with Justin Parisi, Glenn Sizemore, and Sully the Monster.
I love NetApp.
Oh, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Tech on Tap podcast. My name is Justin Parisi. In the studio with me today, Andrew Sullivan.
Your dance moves have improved.
Dude, I'm doing the robot.
I noticed that was a good robot.
You want to see me shut it down? Okay, shut it down.
Yeah.
That doesn't work on podcast because you can't see it, but trust me, it was awesome.
No, my wife's been watching America's Got Talent, and I think you could be a competitor.
I could be a competitor briefly. While they would look at me once and be like, "Yeah, we don't need a robot." Anyway, so this week's podcast, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, XCP. So we've had some other podcasts previously discussing data migration to things like flex groups and that sort of thing. And XCP ties in nicely with that. And we have not had a dedicated episode to that, and now we do. So with us today to talk about XCP, Bogdan Minciu. Is that how I say that, Bogdan?
Yes, that's very correct.
Hey, there we go. All right, so Bogdan, tell us what you do here at NetApp and if you have any social media contact information for us.
So I'm the lead developer of XCP. Basically, this means I'm managing a small development team to provide products around the XCP portfolio. I'm, let's say, part-time Scrum Master, part-time architect, part-time programmer, and part-time DevOps. So I do a little bit of everything, but nothing really good.
So do you have any social media presence that we can tell, like Twitter or anything like that you want to give out, or just your email address or the XCP general DL?
Well, I think that for the XCP itself, people can just get their information on xcp.netapp.com. But for my personal social media, I think that the easiest I can be reached on LinkedIn. You just go there and type my name, and okay. I'm more or less active in there.
Cool. We'll include that in the show notes. Also on the phone is Joshey Lazer.
Hi, Joshey, product manager for XCP.
And do you have any social media presence or any way to contact you, Joshey?
I do have LinkedIn, but not that active.
Okay. So I guess we won't contact you there.
Yes, sure.
We're going to dive right into the XCP piece. So, Joshey, if you could just give us the elevator pitch, more or less, of XCP, how it came about and why it makes such sense for people to use it for not just data migration, but also for data reporting.
So XCP, as you all know, that this basically we do have a scanning and the reporting feature in it, which is very useful to analyze the data, the customer environment, and get the report to us, and that will make us good for do the better planning and the migration. So the second one is that data copy, the migration aspect, it is compared to other tool much faster, especially on the NFS version is even sometime 20 to 30% times faster than the normally available tools in the market. And we also have another version that is a CIFS protocol is coming on. It is going to be released in a couple of weeks.
Okay. So let's focus on the NFS version first, since that's been around a lot longer. Bogdan, if you could give us kind of a high level or even as deep as you want about how that particular tool works. Like, how is it doing things faster than stuff like rsync?
Well, originally, NFS data migration tools were working more or less synchronously when interacting with the NFS protocol. So basically, they were sending an NFS request, like let's say the readdir plus request, waiting for the NFS server to reply with all the entries in a directory of an NFS export, and then start doing work with it. Be it either starting copying files in there or diving deeper into those subdirectories. What XCP does, on the other hand, is that we are parallelizing those calls. Basically, the first call that we are sending, it's of course the readdir plus call, but then for all the directories that are part of that reply, we are spawning multiple XCP subprocesses that does the job for us. Not only that, so not the speed of XCP doesn't come only from splitting those subdirectories into multiple threads, but we are also sending NFS requests in batches. So we don't just send one request and wait for the reply. We send 100 requests, let's say. Of course, this is configurable, and we process the replies as they come. And the same thing goes on the target machine when we send NFS requests to create data, directories, files, and all that. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much how what the innovation inside the XCP NFS engine is.
Okay, so you mentioned that we send batch requests and we can send 100 or 200, however many we want to set up. I'm guessing that the client plays a major part in this, the client performance. So let's just talk about that. Like, what kind of clients do we need to use? Do we need to use multiple clients? What is our network looking like? Is this something that can be as fast as you want it to be, depending on how much hardware you throw at it?
I think that's correct. That's a correct statement. XCP will always hit a bottleneck. We've seen, based on the migration projects we have attended, that the algorithms are never the bottleneck. XCP will either hit the CPU limit or the memory limit or the network bandwidth limit. But most of the times we see that XCP hits the disk's speed limit because, when people migrate from storage, it can very often happen that storage they migrate off of is old storage that's not so performant as the new storage in which they are migrating to.
Essentially, we can go as fast as anything the hardware can handle. That said, we do have some new technology on the ONTAP side that kind of plays in nicely with the XCP tool, the Flex Group technology. So what are you seeing in the field in terms of XCP to Flex Group migrations?
I can speak of from the limited visibility I have in there. I know that the XCP tool has been the tool of choice when migrating towards flex groups. But that's pretty much everything I know around that topic.
Oh, okay. So you just know that it's being used. So let me add a little color to that. So the Flex Group technology, allows you to ingest data on an evenly distributed basis. And we actually play into the XCP tool nicely because it also parallelizes the operation. So as XCP tries to dump as much data to a cluster as possible, Flex Groups is going to naturally handle that ingest of that data and balance it pretty nicely across nodes and member volumes. So if you are doing a migration and you're going to a Flex Group, whether it's from a Flex Vol or competitor system to a Flex Group, XCP does make a lot of sense, especially when you're dealing with NFS v3 data and then eventually CIFS, and we'll touch on that in a second here as well once we finish the NFS portion here. So that said, XCP can be used agnostically across any platform, right? So I can come from X system to ONTAP.
Yes, definitely. As long as it speaks NFS, XCP is there to help you. We do not call any vendor-dependent APIs to perform the migrations. We are just pulling data on NFS and sending it on NFS.
Any NFS v4 support planned or in the future is on the roadmap at all?
The NFS v4, the usage from the customer perspective, the volume is very low. So we have not prioritized, but it is there in the roadmap, long-term roadmap plan.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. We've touched on NFS and the support for that. What version are we currently on for NFS in terms of the XCP version, right?
We are now at version 1.3. Which means we had already 3 successful releases on the roadmap. We are working as well on 1.4, for which we don't have yet a clear release date for, but we work on a couple of enhancements in there as well. One of the features we are building in right now, it's a new sync algorithm, which is an indexless sync algorithm. And the other one, which we hope it's going to come up also in 1.4, it's a new throttling mechanism. And we have received a lot of demand from our customer base to introduce a throttling mechanism because sometimes XCP is simply too fast and they just consume the entire bandwidth of their source systems when they are either discovering it or migrating from it. And those systems are usually production systems and they simply can't afford that.
So can we talk a little bit more about the sync side of things for a moment? So you said that there's an indexless sync algorithm that's planned for the next release. Can you explain what sync or how sync works today and then how that indexless will change that?
Usually when we when we offer support to our customers, into what's the best practice of doing migration project with XCP, we recommend them to run an XCP scan, which will offer you some detailed reporting about the file and directory layout on your source system. Then they are performing the so-called baseline copy, which is basically the XCP copy command. That's usually, or actually all the time, run against an empty target. It will just do a baseline copy. The source system can be, of course, live, and the target system must be offline or read-only. And then they can run a bunch of incremental things. At some point, they will have to do a cutover and perform a final incremental thing during the cutover. All those things are currently based on an index. And by index, I mean that XCP keeps track of all the files that are on a source at the moment when it's doing the sync. Basically, we keep the whole directory structure with all the file metadata around it in a zipped file in the XCP catalog. When we are running the incremental sync, XCP is checking if there are any changes comparing source and the index. So as you can see, XCP never touches base with the target to determine if something else happened on the target, if there are any other NFS clients that change the target, because simply we don't support the use case of having a live target until, the migration project is done. So that's the indexed approach to XCP sync. Now, we have had a couple of users out there that requested XCP to perform syncs against a source and a target that were not baselined with XCP. And this was simply impossible before because XCP needs the baseline index to run on. So now what we are doing is that we're implementing a new algorithm that will scan both source and target, will create a diff out of that difference, and will decide to run certain commands to synchronize them.
So is this something that could be used in a way that similar to NDMP? So if I'm doing NDMP backups, could I potentially use XCP as a backup utility?
You can definitely use XCP as a backup utility as soon as this algorithm would be released in XCP.
Yeah, so NDMP, and the reason why I bring up NDMP is because Flex Groups doesn't support NDMP. So if somebody's looking to back up a Flex Group, XCP potentially could be a viable alternative to do that in the future when we have the algorithm, right?
Right. That's correct. Yes.
Well, I was also wondering if this could potentially be used as a. Do you remember OSSV, Justin?
I do. Open System Snap Vault.
Yeah. Could this be used in place, or I guess OSSV has been gone for 8-10 years, something like that?
It's been a while. Yeah. People have asked for it too, so this could be a compelling way to do that. What do you think? So Bogdan, let me give you some background. So OSSV was Open System Snap Vault, and the idea behind it was the ability to do a snap vault from any client, so whether it's Windows or Linux or any other OS, and back up to a storage system using like a snap vault protocol. They got rid of that a few years ago. I don't know how many years ago. It might have been 8 to 10 years. And since then, there's been a gap. Would XCP be something that could be used, since it is agnostic and it just uses a protocol? Could it be used like an OSSV technology?
Well, yes, I don't see a reason why it shouldn't. It's from a functional perspective, is exactly what you have just described.
Excellent. So it sounds like XCP has a lot more use cases than we can think about, right? So I mean, there's the migration use case, and people really point to that as the main use case for XCP, but I've always seen it as more. So you have the reporting aspect, and you get nice little graphs that get generated, right?
That's an excellent point you're making there. We have first released the tool as a data migration tool. So we thought that customers will take it and they will just do data migrations with it. We have also built in, not built in, but we have also developed a statistics server where XCP sends statistics about how the tool is used. And based on the data that we receive, we see that more than 60% of the use cases is for data discovery, which was a bit surprising for us because, the tool is labeled as data migration, but we just realized that customers benefit of the great scanning capabilities of XCP.
So what do you mean by data discovery in this case? What's the type of information that's being reported out?
Well, around the XCP scan, that's one of the 6 main commands of XCP. You get all sorts of reporting that can be done for you. I think that the first report that users might want to check it out is XCP scan-HTML that will output for you a static HTML file containing information about, let's say, what's the file size distribution. For instance, how many files do I have in the range from 0 to 8 kilobytes, or from 8 kilobytes to 64 kilobytes? Or who are the top 5 users that are using data on this volume? How is the file distribution in terms of access time, modification time, and creation time? Meaning, how many files do I have that have not been touched in more than 1 year, and so on. So those are the kind of reporting that XCP does for you in the HTML format. Now, there's more to XCP discovery capabilities. Once you learn how to use the scan command, it can build all sorts of customized reports. And this is thanks to the matching and formatting options that we have put in. For instance, you can decide to run a scan on, let's say, 100 million files and export to CSV the full path and the owner of all the files that were not accessed in more than 3 months. Of course, for these kind of reports, you have to do a bit of scripting yourself, but hey, XCP in the end, it's an expert tool.
It sounds like this is also, this is funny because we keep talking about products that have been discontinued at NetApp, and then they're now being revived by the XCP tool by accident, really. So there was a tool in DFM called File SRM, which is like a file walking tool that would do very similar things to what you're talking about XCP would do with scans, and look up file sizes and users and that sort of thing. So FSRM, if you're missing that tool, then XCP is a solution you potentially look at for that particular use case. So we've covered OSSV now, FSRM. Let's find out what else this XCP tool can do here.
There's one other use case I wanted to highlight, because we keep seeing this in on our support distribution list. And that's, some of our users are willing to do a DU, so a disk usage on a volume, and find out how much are those top-level directories using. And if you try to do this by mounting a volume on a Linux system, that might take a lot of time because of the nature of the NFS client built in those Linux VMs. XCP has an option for this as well. So you can run a scan-du, which will offer you a list of directories and their entire disk usage. And based on this report, which may sound, at least to me as a non-storage expert, it sounded like a, let's say, trivial report to build, but it helps our customers to understand how they would split out their volumes and how they would like to distribute their migration jobs. So yeah, you can take this information out of XCP as well.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to... I remember now that you mentioned DU. So what I've seen customers use this for, in addition to DU, is LS, right? So a lot of customers need to run LS on a large amount of files for whatever reason, and that can also take a long amount of time because single operation serial processing on a flex vol, and in some cases even a flex group, right? Because if you're only doing it to a single directory on a single volume, you're still going to run into a serial processing. So XCP can do things like DU and LS across multiple threads and allow you faster processing time. So as Joshey mentioned, up to 20 to 30% faster, right, for these sorts of operations. That said...
just a correction there. It was 20 times faster.
That's right.
Sorry. 20 times faster. Even better than I thought.
Yeah, that's like 2,000%.
Yeah, that's right. 2,000. Math. That said, can we do things like RM? Like deleting files with XCP? Do we have that capability where we can do multi-threaded deletions? Because notoriously, deletions in ONTAP have been slow as well. So can we speed that process up with XCP?
We get this question pretty often on the support channels. We try to be really reluctant to offering this capability out wide to the public because it's it's removing data. It's something that you cannot come back from in case you didn't take any security measures. We do have it. It's part of the diag command that is hidden. It's where we place all the experimental and pre-release features in XCP. It's not supported. Our official stand to that is try it. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work, then, well, we don't support it officially. That's the kind of message we've sent to customers.
Message is take a snapshot before you do this?
Right. More or less, it revolves around that.
Wait, what goes wrong here? Like it doesn't delete your data? Is it?
No, what goes wrong is that it does delete your data, but maybe it deletes too much of it. Maybe you fat finger a command and it just grabs, you deleted everything.
Yeah, right.
No. That was my tongue in cheek.
You have a terrible tongue and a terrible cheek.
If the shoe fits.
Anyway, okay, so RM use case, it's there, but not necessarily supported, but it's there. And the reason why I ask is because we do hear this a lot, especially in these large high file count environments where you need to delete things faster than we can do with normal delete commands. So it is something to keep in mind. So if you do want to do deletions, I guess get support engaged and kind of take a snapshot and make sure you do it at your own risk. So anyway, so Bogdan, what are some best practices that you would recommend for XCP? And we'll go into that, and then we'll move on to the CIFS portion.
I think this is more or less a no-brainer. We always ask our customers to run XCP on in a 10 gigabit network environment so that they don't reach the network limit so fast. Second is that we recommend them to run it on a VM that has access to more than one CPU, because otherwise parallelization will have to suffer.
What I want to touch on, really, the one I'm thinking of, is we talk about parallelization and the threads. How would you map threads to CPU utilization? Like, how would you recommend setting a threading? Like, so you can do parallel 100, but that doesn't mean you're going to get 100 parallelization operations when you deal with a single CPU with 5 threads, right?
Usually people think that, or not usually, but we have seen customers thinking that the more parallel threads that they are configuring XCP to run on, the faster it will be. But that's usually not the case. So our recommendation would be to do a one-on-one pairing CPU to number of parallel threads. And the reason behind that is that, let's say if you're deciding to run XCP on 100 parallel threads, then the main XCP process will spend more time orchestrating the communication between those sub-processes than doing actual NFS job.
And that's mapping to CPU or CPU thread?
That's mapping to CPU thread. Well, when we speak about threads in XCP, it's more or less the common definition, but to be technically precise, there are sub-processes. Basically, if you decide to run XCP parallel 64, you will see that when the copy or the scan operation will start, if you run a top, you will see 64 XCP processes on a Linux box. So we are actually spawning that number of sub-processes from XCP.
Well, we definitely want to be technically precise.
Yes, we do. As accurate as possible. All right, so we talked about NFS XCP. Now let's touch on CIFS XCP. And I understand that's a separate product altogether. It's separate development cycles. Talk a little bit about how the CIFS XCP is going to work and what sort of technology it uses. So we're using CIFS. So is it tying into WMI or is it tying into the CIFS protocol itself? How is that transfer happening? I mean, how are we doing that parallelization of that operation?
So in contrast with the algorithms that we've put in place on the XCP NFS version, on the CIFS, in the CIFS world, we have decided for the first version to release a product that uses Windows API to perform file migrations or file reporting in the SMB world, which means we didn't re-implement the CIFS algorithm, but instead we are parallelizing system calls against some CIFS shares that are accessible to the box where XCP runs. The side effect of that is that we are able to support whatever SMB versions the Windows host supports, or whatever SMB versions are negotiated between the Windows host and the storage system.
So just to be clear, when we're using NFS, the management or the XCP system is a part of the data path, right? It copies off of the source system to the target system. But when we're using SMB, it's a direct copy from the source to the target. The control system is not a part of that data path?
No, it is. It is. Sorry, I didn't make myself clear on that. The difference I was trying to highlight is that for the NFS version, we have implemented our own parallelized NFS client. So we don't go through the operating system layer to perform NFS operations. This is, as you know, of course, this is a three-way migration. So first we pull data from the NFS server to the host, and then we send it to the target. The same three-way migration path takes data also when it is migrated with XCP for CIFS. So we also pull data from the source and send to the host and then send it to the target. But we didn't implement our own CIFS or SMB client. Instead, we are just relying on the calls that Windows is doing to, pull data and send data to source and target.
Okay, that makes sense. I was a little bit confused as to whether or not it was in the data path.
Data path is the same, so we are still a host-based tool. The difference is in the way, it's basically in the architecture that we've put in place.
So I know this is a initial release for XCP CIFS. So what sort of limitations do we have currently, and what are we planning on filling as far as gaps go in the future?
Right, so we focused on keeping the same capabilities, the same file level capabilities as for XCP NFS. Actually, we have the same CLI API, as we call it. So XCP CIFS is built around show, scan, copy, verify, and sync commands. So basically, you can see the details of your shares, which are more verbose than on XCP for NFS, as you can imagine. You can also do scans. In here for scanning, we've worked a lot around matching and formatting, and we think that we have put in place a really robust and maybe more richer than the formatting and matching from NFS. It's fully documented, by the way. This was one of the pains of that we've seen on the support channels for NFS. We have copy, which is baseline copy, and we have verify and sync. The sync that comes with the first version of XCP for CIFS is an indexless sync. It's the same as the algorithm I have described for the new sync algorithm in NFS, which means that you can run an XCP CIFS sync on any source and target, regardless of the tool that you have used to perform the baseline. On top of those features, which from a functional perspective are the same as for NFS, we also handle ECLs. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We copy ECLs.
Can you copy just the ACLs? I mean, is there a way to migrate the files and copy the ACLs later, or is this like an all or nothing type of thing? So I'm thinking in terms of robocopy comparisons.
Yes, you can copy just the ECLs. Basically, we have a couple of options that you can specify to the sync command that leave out data. For instance, you have or leave out portions of your files. You have the no data option that will do exactly just what you asked. How do I copy just the ECLs? Well, we leave out the data.
So in line with the earlier question about doing large-scale removal of data, is it possible to do updating of those ACLs? For example, if Justin, the disgruntled administrator, went in and repermissioned a huge folder, and as he was walking out the door, could we leverage the XCP CIFS functionality in order to go in and either restore and or repermission those files in a more efficient manner?
Yes, definitely. So as I told you, all you have to do would be to just run a sync no data, specify a source and a target as parameters, and XCP for CIFS will just copy the ECLs for you. It will leave out the data.
Cool. So as far as the CIFS access now, that's going to bring into question things like multi-protocol support. So being able to access and migrate data on CIFS or NFS, depending on the security style. And what I've noticed with the NFS tools, when I try to migrate data on NTFS shares, like NTFS security style volumes, it has issues dealing with the ACLs and ends up erroring out on me. Is there any way to get around those errors by excluding ACLs and then migrating later? Or are we just be doing CIFS for that? How are we handling multi-protocol scenarios like that? So basically, what I'm talking about is let's say I have an NTFS security style share and it has NTFS ACLs. And with XCP NFS, if I migrated that data, I would get a bunch of errors because it couldn't figure out what to do with those ACLs. And there's no way for me to tell it not to migrate the ACLs in that case, just to bypass all that stuff. It tries to do a change adder, so a chown or a whatever, and it can't because it's NTFS security style. Is there a way to tell it not to do that, or are we dealing with using XCP based on the security style of the volume?
Yes, pretty much. You will, if you are running XCP for NFS to copy NFS data, it will just copy NFS data. If you're running it for CIFS, it will just copy CIFS data. I'm not sure how much that answers your question, but we don't deal with mixed security style.
Right. So what you're saying is if I have a scenario where I'm accessing the same data from NFS and CIFS, I need to recognize what my volume security style is, and then use the XCP version that is mapped to that particular security style. So, for example, if I have an NTFS security style volume, then I need to use CIFS XCP. If I have an Unix security style volume, I need to use NFS XCP. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so let's talk about some use cases for XCP. We talked about moving data and we talked about scanning. How does this compare to 7-mode transition tool, Joshey?
Yeah, this 7MTT, that is 7-mode transition tool, has a few exceptions which don't handle by the tool. That is, one is the traditional volume, and another one is a 32-bit volume. Third one, Q tree. So these three scenarios, the 7MT tool does not cover, but XCP does these three migration very excellently.
Okay, so that's cool. So let's talk about that for a second. One of the challenges people run into is if they want to use something like 7-mode transition tool, they have to be on a specific version of ONTAP. For a variety of reasons, that might not be possible, whether it's hardware or outage times. They don't maybe want to move to the ONTAP version before they migrate because they don't want to take that outage. So XCP is a stopgap for customers that want to move from things like traditional volumes, which I can't see how many of those are out there still. But 32-bit volumes is a good example because some people are still on older versions of ONTAP that didn't convert to 64-bit. And more compelling is the Q-tree use case because there are a lot of Q-trees out there. So being able to migrate from a Q-tree to using something on clustered ONTAP is a valuable piece of the XCP puzzle.
That's right.
So that said, we've talked about how XCP is kind of reviving old ONTAP products. What about Q-tree snap mirror? Could we use XCP as kind of a Q-tree snap mirror? So instead of having to do a volume-based snap mirror for all my Q-trees, could I set up an XCP thread as a cron job and do a kind of Q-tree snap mirror? Could I use XCP to act as if it were a Q-tree snap mirror, right? So let's say I don't want to do an entire volume snap mirror. I've got 100 Q-trees, but I only care about 10 of them that I want to replicate. And
yes,
I don't want to set up... Yep, so go
We
go
can
ahead.
do that one.
Okay, cool. So I can use XCP not only like, doing file SRM or, OSSV, the Open System Snapfall, but I could also kind of use it for a Q-tree snap mirror. So it's another use case where I can maybe fill a gap or use a workaround and use XCP as something to fill a hole that I might have had previously in my environment.
That's correct.
I'm just trying to get you guys more use cases, man. These are things that the field and customers have been asking for, and these are things that XCP can help solve. And the more customers that use your tool, the better for you.
That's right.
All right, so Bogdan, we mentioned a lot of the features for XCP for CIFS, but we didn't talk about any limitations. And my understanding is one of the limitations is taking ownership. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the biggest limitation that we received during the beta phase. Basically, if you're not part of the, if you're not the owner of the files and you can't read them normally, then you won't be able to migrate them with XCP.
And that's from the source system, right? So you need to be the owner on the source system. So doing stuff on the ONTAP system may not necessarily help you. So adding users to local admin groups or setting a CIFS super user, that's not going to help you on the source system, correct?
That's correct. However, we have already started working on supporting this feature, and the 1.1 release is on the way, and this will be the one of the enhancements in there.
Okay. Even though I'm not the owner of the file, could I do things like copying ACLs?
No, you won't be able to do that.
So I can't do anything with that. Okay, so basically what I'm faced with is having to take that source system and make myself the owner or an administrator of some sort on that source system.
That's it. Yes, that's correct, and that's as we've seen so far. That's a bit inconvenient for our users. So that's why we decided to build that in.
Okay, and are we going to be leveraging things like backup operators groups? I mean, how are we going to work around that issue?
Exactly. So we will rely on the fact that the administrator is part of the backup operators group, and we start the workflow from there.
Okay, cool. So we should see that in a future release, and that'll take care of that problem.
Right.
So, Bogdan, we hear a lot about XCP being fast, and whenever somebody says something's fast, there's always this question that follows that up is, okay, well, how fast? Can you prove it? So what sort of things are you seeing in XCP migrations or data copies that prove to us that XCP truly is fast?
Well, we tackle this from two perspectives. First of all, we take performance regression really seriously in our team. So we have a performance regression benchmark that we run for every new release that we make. And we see that the performance in there is pretty much static. We are around 23 times faster than rsync when it comes to copying data, and we are around 6 times faster when it comes to scanning data, so just discovering it. So that's the first aspect. We run this benchmark in our lab in an isolated environment just to make sure that we don't introduce performance bugs in it, and so far we didn't. And the second perspective that we look at performance is based on our customers' experience. And we have seen some really good performance statistics coming up from them. We've seen customers copying a couple of terabytes of data at around 900 megabytes per second, which they said that even for them was pretty impressive.
That's pretty cool. And this is on a 10 gig network, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So have you done any performance benchmarks on, say, 40 gig networks yet?
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay. And what about flex groups? So when you're doing your performance regressions, are you doing that on flex files or are you doing that on flex groups?
We're doing it on flex files in our lab. We know that we've had customers doing it on flex groups as well, but that site was what we call a dark site, so we didn't get any statistics from them. So I can't speak for that.
Does XCP do any validation of the data after the copy? Right? Do we do like an MD5 hash of the before and after, or source and target, or anything like that?
Yes, definitely. You can do an MD5 hash and then compare data based on that MD5, but you can also do a full bit-by-bit comparison. It's not something that's built into the copy or the sync command. It's something that you will have to do manually. So you have an XCP verify command that you will have to run. It takes two parameters, the source and the target, and based on some options, it decides whether or not it should go and check just the file attributes or file data itself.
And that also parallelizes, so it's not like a single-threaded thing, right?
Right, that's correct. And it also offers the same reporting capabilities as the XCP scan-stats, meaning it will show you some histograms with a rough overview of how many files are changed based on their file sizes or file age, and all that.
Okay, so I remember at Insight last year, we had a demo of the cloud tool. What was it? Cloud Mover? What was it called? The cloud moving utility? Cloud Sync.
Cloud Sync. Yep.
Cloud Sync. So I've wondered this for a while. Does XCP power Cloud Sync, or does some sort of form of XCP power Cloud Sync? And if not, how does XCP tie into the data fabric story altogether?
From my perspective, XCP ties in two ways. In a very direct way, because XCP is indeed the engine that's behind Cloud Sync. It's a highly customized form of XCP, but it's still the XCP engine that powers Cloud Sync. And the second part is that as you see, we are becoming multi-protocol now that XCP speaks CIFS as well. And this, I think, supports the core data fabric vision of moving data basically from anywhere to anywhere. There are more and more protocols, of course, that we will have to support to literally say that we move data from anywhere to anywhere, but we are getting there, and that's our mid-term target.
Okay, and CloudSync supports S3, right? So, I mean, we're looking at S3 support, we're looking at CIFS support, and we're looking at NFS support currently.
Right.
That's a pretty good subset of tools there. I mean, could always add FTP support at some point. I'm sure people will love that.
I saw your blog post on that. Nobody
Nobody wants to use that.
How about WebDAV?
WebDAV, yeah. And, PCNFS. When are we getting PCNFS support for this?
Well, we'll have to talk to product management about that.
Okay, so XCP, super fast and moving things around in your data fabrics. So we can find XCP at xcp.netapp.com, and it is indeed free. There is a license you have to apply for, and you have to renew it every now and then. But that license is for tracking purposes only. It's not something you have to pay for. Is that right, Joshey?
That is correct.
All right. So if you want to go out and try it out, I mean, it's free to try. There's no reason why you shouldn't be trying it. If you do, of course, make sure you have lots of powerful machines behind there because you're going to want to see how fast this thing can go. So Bogdan, Joshey, thanks so much for joining us today and talking to us about XCP. And we're looking forward to all the newest and latest releases coming out of that product.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, everyone. All right, that music tells me it's time to go. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email to podcast@netapp.com or send us a tweet at netapp. As always, if you'd like to subscribe, find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, or via TechOnTapPodcast.com. If you like the show today, leave us a review. On behalf of the entire Tech on Tap podcast team and the XCP team, thanks for listening. Man, I'm going to go play with XCP some more. There's a lot of cool stuff I didn't know about.
I'm just happy that there's a new OSSV.
Yeah, and a new Q-Tree Snap Mirror and FSRM. Man, what else can we do with this thing? Can it bake cookies, Bogdan?
We will add it to the backlog, definitely. I love cookies, so why not?
Can I put an RFE in for that? Make XCP bake cookies.
No, you can't. That's exclusive for me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Cookies.